Welcome, and we truly are touched by your presence with us today. Now, Eleanor Roosevelt famously said, "The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams." And joining us today is a dreamer way ahead of his time. Gary Lachman is a well-known author, lecturer, and philosopher whose many books explore the links between consciousness, culture, and the Western esoteric condition. He also happens to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. In his most recent title, Dreaming Ahead of Time, he turns his mind and his eyes wide open and shut to precognitive dreaming. So I suspect he will very likely have foreseen in a dream that you would watch this interview. Hello, Gary. Thank you for being
Hello.
here.
My pleasure. Hello, Teresa.
It's wonderful that you're here. Thank you. Now, I know you very well. I have actually followed you for a long time, but for listeners from the Shift Network who are new to you and your books and your research, would you mind just sharing your story and how you came up writing about precognitive dreaming?
Well, writing about precognitive dreaming, which is basically dreams in which bits and pieces of the future turn up ahead of time. And just a little ahead of what we're getting into, most of the sorts of dreams of that nature we tend to hear about are the two Ds, the disasters or the Derby. So you hear about these natural or these horrible disasters happening, people dreamed of it in advance, or someone wins at the races. But the sort of thing that I've been recording in my own dream journals for a good 40 years now are not like that. I never wake up knowing or thinking that, I've dreamt something that's going to happen. I find out later that day or the next day or something like that. And how I found out this happening, well, again, it started quite some time ago when I was a musician and I was living in New York. And I was reading a lot of books about the occult and the paranormal and mysticism and that sort of thing. All the sort of stuff that many, many years later I wound up writing books about and having sort of a second career about. But I read a book called An Experiment with Time. And it was written in the 1920s by a fellow named J.W. Dunn, who wasn't an occultist or a mystic or anything like that. He was an aeronautics engineer. But he had discovered by chance that he dreamed the future. And I tell that story in the book, and I won't go into it now. But he said that if you too want to find out if this happens to you, because he first thought that it was a strange anomaly only happening to him, and then he realized that this is something that's actually quite common to people, but we don't notice it because we don't pay attention to the dreams. He said, all you have to do is write down your dreams. So I took him at his word, and I started writing down the dreams, and he was right. But it all starts rather banal and kind of mundane. The first precognitive dream I had was in 1980, and it was about playing a red guitar. I didn't have one. I didn't know anyone who had one. But I was walking around New York's East Village then, where I was living, and it was with a friend, and then we bumped into somebody else, and then somebody he knew, and I wound up going back to someone's flat who I didn't know. And in the midst of it, he said, here, check this out. And he handed me a red guitar. And I started playing it. And as I started playing, I realized, oh, this was the dream. So it all started then.
And that led you, I guess, to a lifetime of research now into mysticism, precognition, because you've written many books. Of course, I want to focus on precognitive dreaming as this is a DreamWork Summit. There's so much more about you, your story beforehand. I know people will be interested in that. The switch from a career in music to what you're doing now, it's quite an unusual leap. I'd love to know how that happened, why it happened.
Well, you mentioned, you sort of alluded to Touched by Your Presence, which is a song I wrote. Again, it was even earlier than 1980. I was in Blondie, a very early Blondie, even earlier than that. I started playing with them in 1975. And around the same time as I started playing with Blondie, I was living with Debbie Harry and Chris Stein in a rundown loft space on the Bowery. And this is back in the day when the Bowery in New York really was the Bowery. If you go there now, you can't afford the rent, or forget the rent, you can't afford a cappuccino. But back then it was really, Skid Row. And in this loft space we had, it was 3 floors. The fellow who was renting it to us, he was into Aleister Crowley, the notorious dark magician of the 20th century. And he had the Crowley tarot deck, and he would do these impromptu tarot readings, and he would sort of do paintings based on these. And I hadn't had any interest in anything like that before. But through being in this milieu and him talking about this, I got interested in it. And what really got me going was a book called The Occult, just simply called The Occult, by a British writer named Colin Wilson, who people may know of. He died back in 2013, but he was very active in the 70s and the 80s and all that. And he wrote these fantastic encyclopedic books about the paranormal and mysticism and consciousness. And I read this book then, and it completely blew me away. And this is when I became fascinated with all this stuff. So I was playing then, I was playing in the band then. And a couple years after that, first getting into this sort of thing, when I was on the first tour we did with Blondie, North America. The funny thing happened with my girlfriend at the time and I, we somehow discovered that we were having the same sorts of dreams, and then we wanted to call each other. We would wind up doing it at the same time. And this was, well before having, cell phones or mobile phones or anything. So you had to, find a phone box somewhere and all this sort of thing. And so I wrote the song, "I'm Always Touched by Your Presence Here," about these telepathic and shared dream experiences we had. And that was then, and then that interest stayed with me.
Was it in the family? I mean, interest in mysticism, metaphysics, is it in the family? Is there a genetic component? I'm just interested to know if it's something that you grew up with, your family influence, or any childhood experience that kind of like triggered this interest.
Not really. I mean, if I do remember my father saying a few times that he had the vision of a sister of his, an aunt that I didn't know, or she maybe even died before I was born. And he saw her before she died, but my mother would make fun of him doing that. So I don't know. My mother had the Irish blood, so I think she would probably have had that, but I don't remember anything like that at all. No, I often wonder if, quite a few generations back, because I have some Eastern European DNA, and wonder if there's a Polish alchemist there somewhere, or a Kabbalist, and somehow, and I've just picked up that, that random gene.
Yeah, you mentioned Colin Wilson as a really key influence on your life, and you are actually being compared now. I don't know how you feel about that as the new Colin Wilson.
It could be worse.
It could be. Can you describe again the impact on him and why, in particular, his treatises, his work, his life inspired you so much?
Well, Colin Wilson started out in the mid-1950s, really. It's quite some time ago now. His very first book, called The Outsider, was published when he was 24. And he came out of nowhere. He didn't have an Oxbridge background. He had no university education. He left school, in his teens. And he, should we say it, he had he had the sudden insight that there was something much more to life than getting and spending. And again, this was just before the Beat kind of, I mean, he's one of the people kind of helped kickstart that around the same time in the States. It would have been the Beats, Kerouac and Ginsberg. Here was more, they were called the Angry Young Men. And they were a bit more provincial, I would say, and a bit more interested in social issues here, the Angry Young Men. But not Wilson. He was interested in very spiritual kind of, we would say, or consciousness. He had moments of this intense kind of consciousness, and then other moments where he felt like blowing his brains out. And he wanted to know which was true, which was the real vision, this vision of empty meaninglessness that the existentialists were talking about, or these kind of moments of overwhelming sense of goodness and all is good that poets like William Blake are talking about. He decided that Blake's vision was true, and then this first book was a study of these kind of alienated geniuses who went through these intense, states of alienation and existential angst. And some of them didn't walk away from them, some of them blew the brains out, some of them came through on the other side. And this was an overnight success for him. It was, he came out of nowhere. It was a bestseller. He was in all the newspapers. But then soon after, all the mainstream press sort of turned against him for some reason. They got sick of all the Angry Young Men. It was sort of, at the time, he was sort of in all of the tabloid papers too, because he was like a teen star in the way that Elvis Presley was in some way. But then all that, he lost all that. They turned on him. And it wasn't until some years later, and this book, The Occult, was sort of a comeback book for him. It was another bestseller. But the thing is that it's so well written. It's a page turner. And he has this voracious mind where he absorbs an enormous amount of information from other writers and thinkers and puts it together in new ways, and he gets you moving and thinking. And I mean, I couldn't say I understood half of it at the time, and I was reading. It was more like, wow, that sort of thing. And then, and like my interest in the occult and all the sort of stuff I start write about now. It initially started out as naive enthusiasm. It's like, wow, this is really cool stuff. And over time, you just start to understand it more and understand it more, and you realize, as I have by writing the variety of biographies of people like Steiner and Jung. I wrote a book about Wilson, Madame Blavatsky, Crowley, and also broader sort of surveys of the history of esotericism. A book like, it's called The Secret Teachers of the Western World. In fact, incidentally, I'm teaching a course in that now for the California Institute of Integral Studies, an online course. You find out that these sorts of ideas, which we still tend to think is marginal and on the fringe, are actually for a very long time very much central in Western culture.
Thank you for that. I'm a avid reader of Colin Wilson too, and it is a great read. And I find each decade of my life, if I return to it, you get something new. And it's like great music, great art. Every time you go to it, it brings more. But your books do have similarities, and that you have a very you just get immersed in them. Mm. And I find reading it that you just want to know what happens next, almost like it's a novel when it shouldn't be like that. But thank you for doing that, because it engages people.
No, don't say it shouldn't be. It should be, because it's an adventure. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing about Wilson, is that I think one of the people who, in one of the blurbs, he said he has a narrative style that can make the telephone book gripping. So it is, you like, what's next? And you are thinking, I mean, and it's not static, it's not stuffy academic. I mean, he's shunned by the Academy because he writes so well. You don't need expositors of his work, because he's the clearest you could get. And it all centers on, well, my book about him is called Beyond the Robot, The Life and Work of Colin Wilson. And the robot is a central theme in his work. And put it simply, the robot is a kind of labor-saving evolutionary device that we've developed over time, humans have developed. And the best way to explain it is, when we have to learn something like how to type, or learn a foreign language, or how to ride a bicycle, when we first do it, it's extremely difficult, and we have to devote all of our attention to it, and we have to keep doing it over and over again. And then finally, we get it. We have learned it. And some other part of us can do all that stuff, and then that leaves a higher level of our consciousness available to think about, well, I know how to type now. What do I want to type? Or I can ride the bike. Where shall I go? Or I can play this musical instrument. What can I play? So it frees us up, and it's absolutely necessary. We would never get out the door, if we didn't have it. But the problem is, like an over-eager valet, it works too well. It does things for us that we'd rather do ourselves. But we don't decide to let it do those things. It just does it, and we fall into the trap of living a half-robotic kind of life. Mm. But Wilson discovered with these radical figures as outsiders that many of them, they followed Nietzsche's advice to live dangerously. Basically, if you want to feel very alive, he said, build your houses on the slopes of Vesuvius. Throw yourself into difficult, dangerous situations, and then what happens is the crisis somehow, instinctively throws the robot off, and I have to deal with this now. And Wilson said, yes, that works, but it's kind of crazy, because we've invented civilization in order to minimize crisis. Mm. So we're in a position where we have to put a gun to our heads in order to appreciate the value of life. So there must be some way that we could have that same effect through a conscious effort. And so he wanted to learn a way to clench the mind, to make a fist of the mind, so that it would have the same effect as, you're about to blow your brains out, and suddenly, when you don't, everything seems wonderfully meaningful. So a way that you could do it through an effort of the imagination and not have to depend on crisis.
So getting comfortable, feeling uncomfortable. Getting comfortable outside your comfort zone in a way.
Well, it comes down to, he said, freedom. When our freedom is threatened, and freedom, we can use freedom as a generic word to count for meaning, whatever is most important in our life, whatever gives our life value. When that is threatened, we know exactly what it is. If there's no doubt about it, and we will fight tooth and nail to save it. And we're seeing that on the news now in some form. But once we've secured that, when the threat recedes, involuntarily, against our best wishes, we slip back into the state where we start to take all those things for granted. And this is the problem that he said, he's spent a life studying, why does that happen? How does that happen? Can we do anything to stop that from happening? And yeah, I mean, I can't go into detail now about it, but his books are fantastically readable. And you walk away from them, I think, really feeling like you've gained some insight into things.
Absolutely. And as your many books, now, how many books have you written? About huge?
25 at this point, so it's, not too bad. So not too
it's
bad.
not, you're a serial writer.
One a year. I mean, I actually a little bit more. I mean, I started, the first one came out in 2001, so it's 21 years later. So it's, there's a couple bumper years, maybe two popped out.
Is that way of putting the gun at your head, another book?
Well, in one sense it is, because I tell you, invariably, even though I've done this so many times, I mean, I just finished the book. I just sent it off earlier this year, beginning of February. And now I actually have a bit of free time and I have no idea what to do with myself. So I'm so used to doing that. And I have to, that's my robot is used to, okay, gets back down to it. And I have to actually consciously learn how to relax. Actually, I've been practicing, it sounds odd, but I've actually been practicing on trying to do that. But the other thing is it's, a paraphrase of the old adage, necessity is the mother of production. I mean, frankly, this is how I make a living. And it's not in the sense of churning out, hack work, but it's like, I'm very lucky that I'm able to, something I'm interested in, I want to write about, like this book about dreaming, about precognitive dreams. I had recording these things for years and years and years, and I've mentioned them here and there in a couple of books. And what was the prompt for doing this book? So I gave a talk at Brompton Cemetery here in London about hypnagogia, which is this in-between state between sleeping and waking. Hypnos is the Greek word for sleep, and gogos is a Greek word for guide. So it's this period that guides you into sleep. And we all experience it twice a day. Hypnopompic is the term for when you're rising out of sleep, but it really isn't that different. But in that state, you can watch dreams start to take place, and you can learn how to hover in it. So you're half awake and half asleep. You're half conscious. You're half dream state, as the philosopher Peter Uspensky called them. And towards at the end of this talk, I tagged on some. I talked a bit about precognitive dreams, and I added a couple of my own. And as I had learned from J.W. Dunn, I said to the people in the audience, I said, the easiest way to find out if any of this, is true, just write your dreams down. And the next morning, when I went on to Twitter, as one does, one of the first things I saw was a post from someone who had been at the talk. And she wrote, OMG, in capitals and exclamation points. My God, it's true. And somehow, I forget exactly the number of pixels you have in Twitter, she managed to tell the story that she had gone to the talk. The guy said, if you write down your dreams, you see your dream the future. And it's true. And what she dreamt was that she had picked a hedgehog up off the road and put it onto the pavement. And, they're notorious for being in the road and getting run over. And the very first tweet she saw on her Twitter feed was how to protect the hedgehogs. So she didn't actually pick a hedgehog up that morning, but the first thing she saw was, a tweet about doing that. And this is something, and I wrote back to her and said, yes, there you go. And your dream was subject to what I call symbolic distortion, meaning that because dreams speak in a symbolic language, although often the precognitive event, the future event, is actually, verbatim, real. It's a copy, but equally often it's slightly distorted. It somehow comes across symbolically. So the symbol of, in her unconscious mind said, here, you're protecting the hedgehogs, but that, that's what she saw. So that just, I said, okay, maybe I should, talk to my publisher and see if they're interested in doing this book.
And thank goodness they were. That's Dreaming Ahead of Time.
Yes,
right?
yes, absolutely. Yeah, Dreaming Ahead of Time.
A really recommended read. It's really fascinating. But where are you at now with precognitive dreaming? I've spoken to scientists and dream experts, and some of them go so far as to say every dream we have has a precognitive element. Others will say, no, there's a very tiny percentage, it's rare. I'm just interested where, would you think that
I
all
think it's
dreams?
different for different people. I know for myself, I go through patches where I seem to have more of them. And other times I get through patches where I have very interesting, vivid dreams, and other ones where it's really stupid and boring, and I'm angry with my unconscious, and I think, what am I doing wrong? So I think it differs, with different people. Dunn believed that when we're in the dream state, we're in this what he called time two, and it's a stream of time in which we have access to the past and the future, and it could very well be bits of the future mixed in with every dream, but they could be so inconspicuous that we might not notice them. And again, this is the thing, you sort of really have to notice it. I mean, sometimes bang, they hit you in the head, my God, I dreamed this, but how should I say, it's something that's happened to me, I haven't counted them, but I have been doing it or having them fairly regularly for 40 years. And one of the things you do find if you do the research is that, as I said initially, the ones that we all know about are the disaster or Darby dreams, but the majority of them are usually about rather trivial, mundane, banal events. They're not very dramatic dreams. They're not necessarily something about that's going to change your life. What makes them interesting is that they're precognitive. For some reason, this is turned up ahead of time. Not to say that they can't have this more meaningful impact, but going back as far as the 19th century, the early, it wasn't even called parapsychology then, but the early kind of supernatural researcher Kathleen Crowe wrote this fantastic book called The Night Side of Nature that's still a very good read. She said that, there are some people who have these dreams very often, but they tend to be about rather everyday sort of things, and they don't quite understand why that happens. And I don't claim any particular credit, but I seem to be one of these people to whom this is the case.
Again, there's that school of thought that nothing is trivial in life. We won't go there. So maybe that's why you're dreaming mind. Maybe it's a sign or a portal that when you see something you've dreamt about, that it's something triggers
Well,
something in your waking existence.
yeah, it could be. Again, this is the thing. I've just come to understand there are multiple ways of understanding the dreams. I know from a Jungian perspective, everything in the dream is about you. Somehow your different complexes or different inner personifications, of shadow, anima, and so on and so on. But even Jung has squeezed in there every now and then saying, well, actually, it might not be all the time. It could be about, some real people, and they don't quite, and again, it's not to undermine what Jung's saying. It's saying I think the dreams themselves, like all of the paranormal, all of consciousness sorts of stuff, it's a gradient. That's one of the things I try to get across in the book, is it's mostly about precognitive dreams, but it goes into other kind of temporal sorts of things, even sort of time slips into the past and things of that sort. And I also talk about synchronicities. I think all these things are part of a gradient. So they're not necessarily cut off from each other. They move into like the colors in a rainbow, the colors in a spectrum. You get to a point where it's it's not quite one or the other. I've come to understand. I've come to understand that. And what I mean by trivia, I don't mean it in derogatory sense. It's like as I said, when you have the big dream, when you've got the archetypal dream, it hits you over the head, or when whoever or whomever is responsible for creating the dream is saying something to you. But then sometimes it's just sort of like, why in the first place, why did I? Okay, here's one. One precognitive dream is I dreamt that I saw frog spawn coming out of my palm. Later that day, when I went to pick up my sons, this is quite some time ago, from school when they were still young, I saw their teacher walking towards me, and he had a jar in his hand, and I asked him, "What is that?" And he said, "Oh, it's frog spawn. We went hunting in the the heath today, and found some." I mean, I could spend a lot of time thinking, "What the heck does frog spawn mean?" I looked it up in my dream dictionary and all that kind of thing too. But it just seems to me more like, hey, things aren't not as simple as you think they are. And or another one is I dreamt of sort of termites or insects coming out of a wall. And later that day, I spoke to my parents on the phone, this again, years ago. And they said, yes, we had to take a wall out in the house that we bought because they found out to be termite ridden. So, we're all connected. These things turn up and all that. But it's not the sort of thing where you wake up and my God, what was that dream about? You've been confronted with some big archetypal kind of thing. So again, just like our everyday experiences, they differ.
I love the way you reference, the psychological symbolic interpretation, probably about 99.5%. And then there's that 5% that's so fascinating, the supernormal ones, the telepathic, what you write about, the precognitive, the afterlife, these shared dreaming experiences, dreams of unborn children. I mean, it shows that maybe there's a part of us that exists beyond space and time, and that in the dream state, we connect to that. I don't know
Oh,
how.
I'm absolutely convinced. I mean, it's not something that's rock hard solid in me, and I'm still buffeted by everyday events, but I'm as convinced that there's some part of me and part of us, or at least I am part of something. So that's the other thing. We start with it's part of me, whereas what the wisdom starts. You start to get wisdom when you really realize you are part of it.
Yeah.
You, the everyday you, is a small part of this larger thing that we can get some glimpses of in dreams and other states and meditative states and things of that sort. So, and the other thing is there's an undeniable intelligence. I mean, and what I say in the book, the intelligence that I've encountered in dreams is the same intelligence I've encountered in using the I Ching, the Chinese method of divination, where you throw the coins. And I talk about in the book when it's youthful folly, the hexagram that you get. Well, I've got and others have, because you're not supposed to ask the same question twice, and we all do. We're not happy with that answer, so we throw it again. And when you get youthful folly, the I Ching is basically saying, "I've told you already, don't bother me." And I've got that, quite a few times, and you realize how does this book and the 3 pence I've just thrown or whatever it is know that I'm asking the same question twice? And it has to be whatever that thing that we are part of that is behind dreams and other experiences like that.
I mean, you talk about knowing there. I guess there's no way of knowing if a dream is precognitive until it's played out. So would you recommend, writing down your dreams?
That's
That's
the
what you've
best thing,
done.
to write them down. And it's true, the more you pay attention to them, they start paying attention to you in a way. It's sort of, I mean, the way I've come to think of it, whomever it is, right brain, whatever, part of the brain it might be, whatever, think of it as a shy person you like to get to know. It seems interesting, but it's kind of shy and doesn't really speak, very clearly, but can kind of, get the message across. And I think a homely analogy for how dreams communicate through symbols and things of that sort is if do you know the Transformer films? I mean, I only
Oh,
know them because my sons, when they were young, they liked them, and all the big ones can speak. Optimus Prime, he
oh yeah.
talks in a very big voice, but the little guy Bumblebee, he can't speak. But what he does is he takes bits and pieces of stuff that's on the car radio, so a song or a news something, and he makes a collage or the audio equivalent of a collage together to get his meaning across. And dreams do that as well. They don't speak in straight sequential logical language sentences. You may very well hear sentences as you start, falling asleep in the hypnagogic state. The one I heard, I put at the beginning of the book. Lord, help me believe in the primary dreams of my life. I just heard that drifting into the hypnagogic state one day. So and it just was a voice I heard, coming from occasionally you do hear. Sometimes I hear my name being called as I'm falling asleep. But it's it speaks in that kind of way. It doesn't speak in logical. We do, the rational, conscious ego I. We speak in language and the sentences and prose, but that other part of us, or that what we are part of, speaks in this symbolic kind of way. And it takes a while to actually learn that language and to actually have the patience to sit with it and not try to figure it out immediately.
Yeah, looking beneath the surface for the other meaning. We've kind of lost that ability, I think. We probably had it centuries ago, the ability to think symbolically. But I'm glad you mentioned the Transformers and movies and whatever. I mean, they really have fallen in love with dreaming right now. There's so many movies out there using dreams as a theme to reveal character, to future, and Dune starts dreams are messages from the deep. You must have loved that. Have you seen Dune?
Oh well, yeah. I mean, I remember the David Lynch one, which
Yeah.
less said the better, I think. But no, I watched. Well, with my sons actually, we watched the recent ones. Well, it's how should we say? It's definitely a film that's made for the big screen.
Yes.
I would say that tableau. But the whole idea of dreams and time travel. I mean, metaphorically, if you go on Netflix and throw a rock in any direction, you'll hit a time travel show. They're all about time travel. They're all about that. They're all about this thing. And a philosopher that I regret that I wasn't able to drag into the Dreaming Ahead of Time book, because I tend to bring in as many people as I can. And my books was a fellow named Jean Gebser. It was a German-Swiss philosopher who died in the early 70s. Wrote an enormous book called The Ever-Present Origin. And he just had an idea about human consciousness evolving through different structures of consciousness. Long story short, he believed that sort of what he called the mental rational structure, which is the modern kind of view with us for the past few centuries, is starting to break down, which we might see in world events in one way. But he believed one of the signs of a kind of shift in consciousness that he believed would be happening would be what he called the eruption of time. And that time would become more and more something that was part of our everyday experience. Now, obviously it is, but somehow in a very different way. And I when I first read that, I thought, God, something as simple as podcasts, or I don't know, it used to be TiVo. I don't know what it is in the States anymore, but the idea that you can watch anything you want, whenever you want, wherever you want. And I'm of a generation. I remember when I was a kid, if there was something I wanted to watch on TV, I had to be home or at least in front of a television set whenever it was on. So time and space are very limited. But now it's like you could be anywhere, anytime, listening to anything.
That is a brilliant point. I remember when I was younger, Pole Dark on the BBC. Yes, I remember, and rushing home for it. That's really interesting that you're saying that. But as you get older, talking about age, and do you find that your life feels more like dream-like? Because I've often read that as we're going ready to our final transition, hopefully it's decades away, Gary.
Not quite yet, but one hopes. But I know what you mean. I think how should we say it? Dreamlike in the sense that many of the things that at an earlier time seem very, very important and pressing and urgent, they start to drop away, and you are faced with like, well, what is this? What has this been all about? You sort of, we're all existential. You're always thinking about the meaning of life, from an early age. But then you start to get a certain age, you really think, well, you know what? Actually, what nobody knows. What is this all about? I mean, I that's one of the things that I always get. I think I can't believe that this whole big thing out there, they call the universe, us on this planet, going on for thousands of years, and there isn't one person you can go to and they could say, "Yep, it's about this," and say, "Okay." I got that. And I'm not saying it isn't about anything, but it is this strange kind of thing. And I do start to, I don't like the whole idea of it. This is simulation. I don't like that idea. One, because nobody ever asks a simulation of what. Okay, because you can't have a simulation unless you have an original. But something more along the lines of the samsaric or the Maya or something along that, and you start to feel like, I don't know, did I have to go through all of that to get to where I am now, to start to see like things are a bit different than I thought they were?
And in your journey of your life, your dreams, have they helped you along the way? You know, dreams have helped you understand maybe why you went through that horrible time, or why this didn't happen or that did happen. Have your dreams helped you sort of evolve, if you think we're here to evolve?
Hmm. Yes, and there's one that I didn't put in the book, but in an earlier article I wrote about precognitive dreams some time ago. I did write about it. And this was many, many years ago when I lived in Los Angeles, and I was working at a place called the Bodhi Tree Bookstore, which was a very famous metaphysical bookshop in California. It doesn't exist anymore, but it had its heyday in the 80s. Shirley MacLaine, the actress, put it on the map when she went there and started buying crystals and, got into her aura and past lives. And she did a TV, miniseries about it. But while I was working there, I was also studying at the university. I was getting a degree in philosophy. And I sort of thinking I should be able to do something, with my mind, whatever. It's fine working at the bookshop. It's a nice, cozy place to work in, but I'm thinking I should be doing something more. Didn't quite know what to do it myself. I wanted to write, but I wasn't really writing anything yet that, I could send to anybody. And I was wondering whether I'd already that's right. I already got the BA, and then I was going to go, wondering whether I should go onto graduate school. And long story short, there's a book called The Invisible Writing, and it's by a 20th century writer, Arthur Kessler, who, again, people don't read him that much anymore. He's one of the people I talk about in Dreaming Ahead of Time, because he was very interested in precognition. He wrote a very influential book in the 70s called The Roots of Coincidence. And he was a very well-respected, prestigious political and science writer who came out and took parapsychology seriously and things of that sort. But this book, The Invisible Writing, is an autobiography of his. And the phrase invisible writing came to him when he was in prison in Spain during the Spanish Civil War, and he didn't know whether he was going to be shot or not. And he had a mystical experience in which, in the cell where he was waiting, he suddenly became aware of the reality of infinity. And he talks about scratching the formula for how to figure out a prime number on the wall with like a rusty nail or something like that. And he became so involved in this proof, and he said this fascinated him because it was a finite proof of infinity, that he became completely oblivious to where he was. He forgot where he was, and then he realized, oh yeah, I'm in a cell, I might be shot later. Oh well, okay, so what? And he became so convinced of infinity that the whole idea of being shot and all the political worries that got him there and all this kind of thing, they all drifted and disappeared. And he became convinced that the truth of existence is written in invisible writing, not in he was a Marxist at the time, and he's not in the dialectical materialism of Marx, and not in the reductive science of physics or whatever. Truth is this invisible writing having to do with these kind of mystical experiences. And so at the actual store where I'm working, a copy of this book is there, and I was going to buy it, and I put it on hold, but then I decided not to buy it because we got discounts, so I took it off hold and I put it back on the shelf. That night I had a dream, and in the dream I bought the book, The Invisible Writing. Now, dreams speak and play on words. If you buy something, it means that you accept it. I'll buy that idea. Yeah, okay, I agree with that. So I bought The Invisible Writing. The next day I actually did buy the book, but should we say, literally I paid for it and bought it, but I bought it in the sense that I agreed with Kessler that yes, the truth of things is in this other world. And I didn't go on to graduate school. I didn't go on to take the safe road into academia. So that dream decided me to not do that and to take the plunge eventually into becoming a writer.
And I'm so glad you did. And I'm not psychic, but I sense there will be many, many more books, because you have such an expansive knowledge. It's just brilliant talking to you. I'm just absorbing it like a sponge. Absolutely love it. But for our listeners, is there a tip or something about if they wanted to be more tuned into the precognitive potential of their dreaming mind, that something that you could suggest?
I mentioned hypnagogia, and that's a state that's particularly given to different sort of paranormal sorts of experiences, but precognition is one that often is associated with it. And in fact, this is one of the things that Dunn did himself in order to somehow prove. And if you want to try to do it, I would suggest try to doing it in the morning rather than as you're going to sleep. Because when you first try to stay awake as you're falling asleep, which is, does not compute, it's contradictory messages, you usually wind up just having a bad night's sleep initially. Although, it depends how you sleep. You could find yourself just drifting into it, or if you take a nap during the day. I find if I take a nap during the day for 10 minutes and I lie on my back and I just immediately drift into like a reverie, I might have something that it'll pop up about later that day or the next day or something, or I'll get that phone call from whoever it was I thought about as I was drifting off to sleep. But if you do it in the morning, if you set your alarm clock or whatever it is a little bit earlier, so say give yourself 20 minutes or a half hour to wake up ahead of time, as it were, drift back into sleep, and try to hover in between staying awake and staying asleep, and pay attention to what comes to you there, and keep a record of it.
And have ideas for your books and in the past for your music. Did that come? Was your liminal states a creativity hack for you?
When I was a musician, it's funny because I had to learn how to write, but I didn't have to learn how to write songs. I mean, I grew up, I was a kid in the 60s, so I grew up, what they call the British invasion. And then you had Motown, and then, the sounds of San Francisco said like one really good song after the other. So I absorbed all that. And when I started playing, you didn't have to be a really good musician. I mean, I don't mean to say that in a negative way, but that was sort of the catch at that early punk. It wasn't about being, it wasn't about being Emerson, Lake and Palmer or Yes. It was, about simple stripped down, 3 chords and that kind of thing. And I just somehow brought back up all of these sort of chord changes and, and it kind of came out naturally. And then that, I think with something like that, that's why most lyric poets, the best stuff is written when they're young. It's you're singing your soul. That's what it is. And then after a while, you've sung that. And then one reason or other, I didn't carry on, expressing myself through music. But it took me a good decade to learn how to write anything.
Really?
So when I used to get ideas for songs just walking around, so there's a certain rhythm just walking, and you find a kind of melody or hum tune come into your head, and then you just got to grab some words and then go write it down. So that's what I used to do. Walk around New York. I start to feel something in my head. I have to go run back to the loft and write it down.
Oh, you really do capture the Helen Keller quote: "The best things in life are unseen." That's where we close our eyes when we cry, kiss, and dream. That came to my mind. Because music and dreams, they are similar, actually. They're both like the language of the soul.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think the most important things significant in our life are invisible like that. There are things that we have absolutely no record for. There's a wonderful quote from the writer J.B. Priestley, who's another English writer nobody reads anymore. That's one of my specialities, reading all these English writers that nobody reads anymore. And but he called himself a time-haunted man. And he wrote several plays about precognition. But he has a phrase I say in the book, I'm probably paraphrasing, but he says, some of the most important and significant and powerful experiences of my life have come to me in dreams. And I have less evidence for them than I do for having a cold or a broken fingernail. So you could have a tremendous peak, and myself, the most powerful peak experiences I've ever had, Abraham Maslow's, phrase for the moments of overwhelming delight have come in dreams. And I'm the only one who knows that. I know I can't prove that in any way. I can't quantify that. So, I mean, the most important things to us are these fragile, sort of fleeting things.
They are. Thank you so much, Gary.
Oh, my pleasure.
Most important thing, where can people get hold of a copy of Dreaming Ahead of Time? Where can people do a course with you? Where can people find out about with you, connect to you? Because I know the Shift Network listeners will be very keen to do that.
Oh, well, the book's available, all the usual sources online. I have it's a blog. It's just my name, garylachman.co.uk. And I post things, talks coming up. There's quite a lot of stuff on YouTube, videos and interviews about it's a book about dreams and others as well. And yeah, so I mean, these days it's not hard to find somebody. So if you just Google me, you'll probably come up with more stuff than you want.
Do you have a website?
Oh yeah, I said yes. It's GaryLachman.co.uk. But it's just, you know, it's kind of a blog, and there's a lot of stuff I post and links to upcoming talks and things of that sort.
Thank you so much, Gary, for your precious time. And I have to do it. But dreams love punning and everything. We've all been touched by your presence, dear. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.